Welcome to the Authority File, the podcast that features conversations about the life cycle of scholarly communication. I'm Bill Mickey, your host and the editorial director at Choice. In this series, we're going to be talking about skills, not nunchuck skills or bow hunting skills or computer hacking skills, but librarian skills. See what I did there? My guests and I will be riffing off of a recent report published by Technology from Sage with collaboration from SkillType called the Librarian Skills Landscape. We'll highlight and expand on many of the key takeaways from the report, but we'll also talk about real skill building initiatives happening in academic institutions. Joining me on this 4-episode series, which is brought to you with generous support from Sage, are David Erlandson, Head of Cataloging and Metadata Services at Rice University's Fondren Library, Marcy Simons, Director, Hesburgh Libraries at the University of Notre Dame, Matthew Weldon, Library Patron Consultant at Technology from Sage and an author of this report, and Tony Zanders, Founder and CEO at SkillType. In this second episode of our series, my guests and I dive into the Librarian Skills Landscape report and highlight the key takeaways, such as the kinds of tools and products librarians consider important and a perceived lack of confidence in assisting the library community with questions about artificial intelligence. Okay, so I want to get into the key takeaways and findings from the report itself. So Tony and Matthew, I'll pop over to you real quick. So why don't we start with each of you and your key takeaways from the report and survey. So what stood out for each of you? And Matthew, I'll just start with you.
Yeah, no worries at all. I think there are 3 key pieces of information for me, and I think one of the things when you have read the report, or when listeners go and read the report, is I think there are a lot of different findings in there, but I think that the things that are really leapt out to me are kind of are connected. There's the fact that librarians, we found, are really confident in their day-to-day roles. They understand what's expected of them. They understand, they feel comfortable in that, and they feel confident in doing that. But what was really notable is that confidence in advancing careers was generally lower. Not 100%, but generally we found that was lower. And I think that is striking because, to me, that has quite concerning implications for staff morale, for retention, and particularly because that confidence is, or that lack of confidence is pronounced in hybrid workers. Whether that's to do with a lack of opportunity to discuss that with management or with their colleagues, I'm not 100% sure, but it's concerning that there is that inequity, that they're having that different experience based on whether they are based on campus or whether that's at home or somewhere between the two.
Mm-hmm.
And then following on from that, confidence in sort of general technical ability and in digital transformation, again, pretty high across the board. But we see, once again, that there's that lower confidence in dealing with generative AI and in feeding out to staff and students about what responsible or ethical use of generative AI looks like. And I think that's really sort of demonstrative of how much of that is unknown at the moment. Even now, over a year on, a lot of that is still unknown and unknowable. And I think we're all kind of trying to figure out exactly where it's useful, where it's not, what it's good for. Even more fundamental questions like what constitutes plagiarism is using AI to generate your essay structure, but then you write the whole essay yourself. Is that a form of plagiarism? Is it plagiarism to have an AI look over your report and suggest corrections? So there's a huge amount of unknowns around that, and I think a lot of those questions aren't really for any single person to answer. I think we're kind of all working together to try and generate a shared understanding of that stuff. And then just to the final thing that really sticks out for me is around challenges to upskilling. And what we found, we asked, about a few key challenges that we thought librarians might find when it comes to upskilling. And what we found that generally people were reasonably positive. The results were quite mixed, but they were reasonably positive as to whether or not there was a clear path for upskilling at their institution. People tended to know where to go and who to approach to do that. But what we did find is that people, by and large, did not feel that they had the time or budget necessary to complete their training. That's, these are fundamental issues, and I'm sure we've all dealt with a lack of time or a lack of budget, and it certainly sounds just based on what we've discussed already, Marcy and David have found, good solutions to this problem at your institutions, which is really heartening. But what was striking about that for me is that I believe in their 2022 library survey, Ithaca S&R found that only 10% of library directors, when asked, said that if they had a 10% increase in their budget, they would allocate that towards personal development. And 20% of library directors, so double, said that they would actually conduct a 10% cut to personal development budgets. So if people are already feeling, that they don't have the time and they don't have the budget to undertake that upskilling, we don't want to see that situation get worse. We don't want to see a reduction even further in that budget. So that really leapt out to me, just on the basis of the other research that's been done in that space. That situation doesn't necessarily look like it's likely to improve,
Right.
and that's a concern.
Yeah, and it seems like that final observation of yours, Matthew, kind of could potentially kind of creates a vicious cycle with the first observation, which is the lack of confidence and an ability to uh, for opportunities to advance.
100%. I
Yeah.
don't think I don't think those are mutually exclusive at all. I think that is likely to feed into the other, and that can become quite a vicious cycle. And the only other thing that I would say on that, I mentioned that I think the confidence in advancing your career having implications for morale. It's you can understand why someone in a position where they are struggling to understand how to move on to the next step, that's going to actually, it will lead to issues with retention. If you're not feeling motivated and I wouldn't feel motivated if I thought that, there was no pathway to progression there. So I think that is, that's certainly a concern, and certainly one of the things that jumped out to me in our findings.
Yep. So Tony, I'll jump over to you. What were some of your takeaways?
Yeah, quick follow on to Matthew's last point that McKinsey published a report following the Great Resignation that the number one reason why employees were resigning wasn't due to pay or salary issues. That was number two. Number one was around feeling disconnected to the organization's mission and not having a clear pathway of what's next for them or what opportunities for growth there are here. And so just sort of feeling like you're on an island, even though you're a part of an organization. I agree with Matthew's sort of takeaways and observations on the report. I'll start with just one for me that was sort of validating and encouraging that if you think about where library leaders are last year and this year, there's a much stronger focus on personnel and on people development. If you look 10 years ago at any of the reports from any agent association or conference, there was not this focus on people. You would not have found staff development as a part of the strategic plan or committees for this purpose. And so just if you do like a 10-year comparison today versus 10 years ago, we're no longer solely or primarily focused on collection development. We're actually now, you see a strong increase in roles that are dedicated to organizational development, dedicated to staff development. And libraries are no longer outsourcing that wholesale to campus HR. They're insourcing it and bringing that expertise in to focus on the unique needs of the library. And so that was encouraging, I think, to see that we're moving in the right direction, because the needs of the library are unique. What work does and work is in the library is not the same as the facilities department on campus, or athletics, or admissions. It's specific, and it does need its own Marcy or a committee like at Rice to focus on it. I think the second takeaway that was encouraging and validating as well, I think, was the emphasis on the importance of soft skills. Most of our colleagues who have master's degrees or advanced degrees do not have them in business or HR, or they haven't been collectively taught how to lead or manage or supervise. Right. They've been trained to manage information, not people. And I think it's important we acknowledge that and start to focus on how do we increase capacity in these areas that are not traditionally considered a part of library work, but they certainly are, in order to be more effective and create healthy organizations. And so I think seeing that was validating. I think the one part that was not encouraging, but again, it's important to capture this snapshot, was the lack of preparedness for automation and disruption. Today it is generative artificial intelligence. I think, 7 or 8 years ago, it wasn't Gen AI, but it was the move to the cloud. And as organizations, we didn't know how to handle the fact that the work we were doing as systems librarians or tinkering with our own systems, we're no longer doing that work anymore. That has been outsourced to vendors. And I think organizations didn't know how to repurpose people and to reorient people. And so you would have hoped that after going through that transition, when libraries moved to the cloud with their software, we would have been better prepared for what generative AI is doing and going to do this decade to our jobs. But I don't think we were, and I don't think we are. I think that we need to increase the urgency around change management and create more resilient structures that let folks know, hey, what you were doing 8 years ago, you might not be doing anymore. And that's not a critique on you as a person. It's an acknowledgement that our work is dynamic and we're all resilient. We're able to shift. And it was discouraging that the report, I think, showed we're not handling the AI conversation as well as we could. So hopefully acknowledging that can sort of create a conversation. And I think through podcasts like this and others, we are talking about it more.
Yep. Yeah, that's great, Tony. Thank you for bringing that up. Do you get the sense or have a feeling, though, that with something like AI, it's not just sort of on the librarian's shoulders. It's sort of, that's an institutional-wide concern. It's a shared concern of very broad potential impact. But I can also add a sliver of encouragement there in terms of our perspective from Choice. We've done a bunch of webinars now and some podcasts and reports on AI's impact in the library, and we're seeing an awful lot of sort of proactive behavior from individual librarians in learning about AI and learning and sort of taking a sort of seat at the table in terms of making sure that the library is a place where that's developing frameworks around the use of AI within the curriculum, and citing it in sort of all these nerdy practical ways in terms of like, how AI is being used in research and at the student level, and making sure that these guardrails are being set up and, implementing standards of practice and that kind of thing. So we are seeing, from our perspective, a lot of activity on the librarian side. It may have been sort of all of a sudden, it wasn't necessarily a gradual kind of thing, but they're certainly, scrambling to get on top of it, which is a good thing. Yeah. So Marcy and David, would love to hear your takeaways. Marcy, why don't we start with you?
Sure, I would echo everything that Matthew and Tony said. As far as takeaways, and I do want to say one of my favorite parts of the report is I'm a huge fan of Stephen Bell. In fact, his article, Find a Passion for the Profession, Academic Librarianship in 2003, kept me in library school when I was like, is this even worth it? And he is spot on when he says we have got to move from a change management mindset to change readiness. Because change management takes 3 to 5 years. Change readiness is exactly what I think Matthew and Tony highlighted.
Yeah.
We have got to be ready for this new paradigm shift that's coming our way with AI and all of those changes. I again, didn't see anything that really surprised me. In fact, a lot of validation in my work, the colleagues who do similar work. Not surprised that leadership development wasn't as highly prioritized by librarians as it was leaders. We need more leaders in libraries, but it's hard work. And we don't train them to be leaders in library school. And what I've been finding, and we're going through a realignment, so we're trying to find people who are willing to serve as interim leaders. And, a subject librarian wants to be a subject librarian. They want to keep doing their subject thing. They didn't go to school to be a leader, and they're kind of hesitant. And they've seen how hard it's been the last couple of years on leaders with pandemic, the Great Resignation. Do we go virtual? Do we go back? What's the impact? It's hard to be a library leader. So I would love to see somehow that we focus more on building those leadership skills, because those leaders are retiring. They're burned out. They're done. Yeah. And we've got to have people ready to fill in those roles, be change ready for that to happen, not just put a plan in place.
Do these jibe with the soft skills you were talking about earlier?
Yes.
Yeah.
And totally all of the soft skills are what I see that we need. I wasn't surprised. Data management. Yep. We need more of that. We're being asked to do more in data management realms, which is great. Campus is seeing us as a partner that way. But again, the MLS doesn't really, we're finding new, I should also say, some library schools are doing a really great job of revising their curriculum, trying to plan for these new things that are coming our way. But traditionally, there's, not a lot of degrees out there in like MLIS and data management.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a hard time filling those. We've got 2 positions open right now, and got some interest, but again, they don't have the MLS. And to be a library faculty here at Notre Dame, you have to have the MLS, terminal degree. So I think that's something, I know, Dr. Dames, that's something we talk about a lot. Like, will the MLS, what's the future of the MLS in our profession? What's going to happen there? A lot of unknowns.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, Marcy. But Dave, I know it's hard to be the last one to go after everybody else has talked about their takeaways and still able to contribute something unique. But I'm curious to see what you think.
Absolutely. A lot of those things stood out to me. I particularly noted, in the report, there's a chart of, the top 30 skills that, people have and want. And, cataloging metadata is one of those top 30. But I made a note that, almost half of the skills present on there, especially the soft skills, are things that serve technical services staff just as well as any other department in the library. So I do think overall, one of the AI transition to embracing AI was a big takeaway as well. And I think, those in technical services and cataloging really need to kind of embrace it a little bit more. There is like this older approach of, cataloging one item at a time with like a book in hand approach. And that's important, but, we need to build out other ways of kind of building up skills to do things in batch and being confident with that. So that involves embracing those data, familiarity with data and data science, and even some of the AI skills. Personally, I'm not currently convinced that like large AI products are poised to disrupt like the cataloging scene. The report does mention that at one point, but we'll kind of see. ChatGPT is great at stringing together words to make it convincing sentences, and that's going to aid in things like reference. And there's other AI tools, voice to text could do a great job mimicking content for like an oral history project if you're in like an archives or special collections. And those sorts of language models would be great to implement, but I think libraries and librarians need to actually dive in and learn them and try to build tools out of them. Because I don't think like the chat GPT folks are going to be too concerned about our problems directly, not for a while anyway, because they've got other markets they're going after. I did want to highlight there's a couple people diving into this. There's a guy at Stanford, Jeremy Nelson, who's creating a tool that can take paragraphs of text and convert it into like a folio mark record, which is kind of an interesting approach to implementing AI. But yeah, there's so many ways that people can dive into this, and it really starts with just starting to understand the tools, right? So I came across a session on skill type recently, actually, that was Make Your Life Easier with AI. I think Diane Connery presented it. It's recorded on YouTube. Anyone can access it. So I would highly recommend that. It's a good way to get familiar with the tools that are out there right now. I did pull out the Ian Snowley and Steve Bell quotes from earlier in the report as well. Particularly, I thought they played out well off of one another. Ian was talking about users recognize value when it solves their problems. And Steve Bell mentioned that, design thinking and user experience are, we need to develop our practices as problem finders. And I think that's really important. And I think both patrons and other staff will start to recognize that as we pick up these skills. And likewise, Marcy, when we're talking about hiring people, we have a question along the lines of how do you consult with people without just doing the work for the patron? And I think that's kind of gets at what these quotes are talking about, right? We need to be experts at identifying the actual problem that a patron has and trying to not just do the work, but explain to them how it can be solved with their information, problems. So,
right.
Yeah, things are definitely changing quite a bit. And the last thing that really stood out to me is like, how are library administrators going to approach these problems, right? From like an HR standpoint, you might see skills combining into individual roles. Do you start cutting staff, or do you start opening up time to, say, oh, you've got 8 to 10 hours this week to go kind of focus on new projects and new things involving AI, because ultimately efficiency is a factor here. So if we create more efficient librarians, are we going to hopefully not reduce our staffing, or are we going to just open up some free thought time?
You just heard from David Erlandson, Head of Cataloging and Metadata Services at Rice University's Fondren Library, Marcy Simons, Director, Hesburgh Libraries at the University of Notre Dame, Matthew Weldon, Library Patron Consultant at Technology from Sage and author of the Librarian Skills Landscape Report, and Tony Zanders, Founder and CEO of SkillType. This episode was brought to you with generous support from Sage. Join us next week when we turn our attention to how institutions are implementing specific skill-building initiatives and whether information schools are meeting the demands of contemporary academic librarianship. As always, underwriting opportunities for the Authority File podcast are directed by Choice's Advertising Director, Pam Marino, and all of our episodes are produced and edited by Choice's digital media producer, Sabrina Kofer, with support from digital media assistant Ashley Roy. That's all for this week. Thanks for joining us.